Hello world, welcome, thank you for joining me. I'd like to spend some time today talking to you about the ego. What does this word really mean? So, in society, the word ego is generally used to refer to someone who has an inflated opinion about themselves, someone who thinks highly about themselves, or someone who comes across as quite self-obsessed. And while that does make some sense, what I want to explain to you today is the true nature of the ego, and that it's actually much more commonplace than most people realize. So I think the best way to understand the ego is to actually look at what the ego is not, first of all. So inside of the mind, there are actually two entities, two minds that are like housemates living within your own mind. And the part of you that is the real you, your true essence, your true divinity, is what might be called the higher mind. And the true nature of every person's soul is love. And so what is actually happening in the mind is that there's a part of you who's having this experience, whose nature is love and can only ever be love. There's nothing that could happen or not happen which could threaten or alter that. But everyone's aware of these parts of our minds, are parts of ourselves that are having thoughts and behaviors and patterns that are definitely not loving. And so what I want to invite you to contemplate is this idea that anything that's in your mind that is not perfect love is actually the ego. Now, the ego is something that is associated with the experience of fear. And the way that I would look at it, or the way I think about it, is that the expressions that we have that might be fear-based, or anger, or jealousy, or frustration, or hatred, all of those things are actually a fear response from the ego based in the beliefs that it is holding. So the metaphor I have that I think of it to help me is this idea of the ego is almost like this frightened puppy or a frightened dog who maybe it hears a knock at the door and it thinks, oh, well, like, who's that? What's going on? Like, is there danger? And its first response is to think, I'm afraid. What do I need to do to protect myself? And so when it hears the knock at the door, this frightened puppy, this frightened dog starts to bark really loudly in response to that as a defensive mechanism. And this is what is actually happening with the ego. So we're moving through life and there are experiences, situations, people that are triggering beliefs that our ego is holding that is causing the fear response, which might be something to do with, oh, what's this person saying about me? Or how does this experience reflect on me or my value? Or what does this mean for my future? There are loads of different fears that can come up. And in fact, what I'm inviting you to contemplate and to consider is this idea that those fearful responses are in fact the ego's fear and defensive reaction, but that you are always only ever the higher mind, the soul, the pure loving essence, which can be having the experience of witnessing your ego. Now, the response to that I would suggest, like my advice, would be that you, as the loving presence of your true self, your soul, can then comfort the frightened puppy within you, the frightened dog, comfort the ego, it's a scared like little being of like, oh my gosh, like, am I safe? Am I loved? And if you can have the awareness and the presence to start to recognize when you have moved into those kind of thought patterns of fear-based thoughts, then you can start to parent and love yourself and loving the ego to say, it's okay, don't worry, like, you know, you're going to be okay, like, tell me what you're thinking, tell me how you're feeling, tell me what beliefs are in here that are creating this response in you. And almost like if you were the person who did have the knock at the door and the dog becomes frightened, you are the one who's going to manage the situation and step in to say, don't worry, I've got this, we're going to navigate this and everything's going to be okay. And this is a massive, massive leap to take, from being fully identified with the thoughts in your mind as being who you are and your truth, and the truth of who you are, your existence, your essence. To move from that jump to realizing the thoughts in my mind are not actually all me. The thoughts in my mind are fear responses that are happening, that I'm experiencing, I'm observing, and I have the ability, I'm empowered to do something about them. That is a huge, huge jump in a spiritual journey. And it's something that we're all working on all the time. Like, I'm still working through this to deeper and deeper layers every day. But once you can disidentify from the ego patterns and realize that it has no reflection on who you really are, your essence is always love. The value of your soul cannot be changed based on anything that you say or do, or don't say or do, then things start to make a lot more sense from this point. And this can help people navigate onto a huge path of healing out of self-blame and shame and guilt and regret. Another way to think about it might be useful to refer to the ego's thoughts as being like having an earpiece in your ear. If you had an earpiece in your whole life and you never knew it was there, you would have no awareness that you're hearing someone else's thoughts in your mind. You would assume that those are your own thoughts. And so when those thoughts say, oh, like you've done that wrong, or oh, there's something wrong with you, or you're a worthless piece of shit, you know, these are the sort of things that our minds are saying to us all the time. You would never know that this isn't actually true. This isn't actually coming from me. You would believe it because you would be so identified with it. But creating that sense of separation, when have I moved out of love? Now let me remove myself from that experience and see how can I be curious and welcoming and accepting of what is the experience of my ego and what has been triggered inside of it. Yeah, it's just been a huge, huge turning point in my journey. And I mean, a book that I found really useful is the Chimp Paradox book by Professor Stephen Roberts, I think it is. I'll put a link in below. So yeah, if you want to learn more about the dynamic of the ego and the soul or the higher self, the part of you that is actually your true essence, then that book was really helpful at the start of my journey. And yeah, it refers to what can be considered like the monkey mind versus the human mind, are two words for the same concept. So yeah, I hope this has helped, and I just want to really confirm and like exaggerate this message of your true nature is, it can only be love. It is always love. Even when we're expressing thoughts or behaviors or actions that aren't loving, those aren't a reflection of who you truly are. And the same goes for every other person in your life, every other person in the world. When you look around at other people who are taking actions that are fearful or harmful, you can in yourself realize that, wow, this is a loving being who has been commandeered, hijacked by the ego fear patterns inside of them. So yeah, have have a think about it, contemplate it, question yourself, start to analyze your own thoughts, analyze your own mind, and as I've said before, become your own podcast interviewer. Start to interview yourself, start to interview your thoughts. If you can bring presence into your day and question, why am I saying that to myself? What is causing me to say those things? Who is saying that thing? Is it coming from me or is it coming from my ego? And from that point on, everything can change. Thank you for joining me today, and as always, sending you loads of love.